Well, we tend to, if you don't mind, if you fill in these seats first, because I think what ends up happening is everyone comes and then these ones get full, inshallah. Thank you. What's your name, brother?
Abdullah.
Abdullah? Yeah. I looked at you and I was like, I recognize the face. But you've got like a feet taller. Yeah. Mashallah. How are you? You good? You keeping up? Good to see you.
All good. How are you?
I feel embarrassed now. I was like, I looked at you and I was
No,
like,
it's fine, man. It's been a long time. How you been?
there you are. Keeping up?
Good. All good. Looking forward to this.
We'll talk about it after, inshallah.
How you doing?
Alhamdulillah. You good?
Okay.
How's everything?
Beer's getting bigger week by week.
That's what tends to happen with hair growth.
I need to aim for something like that. That's what happens with what?
With hair growth. It grows week on week. Mashallah.
Used to be a little stubbly thing back in the day. Not even that long ago.
You here by yourself today?
No, I've got Rehan.
Mashallah.
And Sam is here.
Inshallah. Okay, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We'll just let you grab your tea and coffee, inshallah, if you wish. And then we'll get started. تقرأ القرآن؟ So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. It's okay, but I need that, because I haven't asked him to prepare anything, so he might be on the spot. Do you want to? Have you got something prepared in your head? Come on, Abdullah, you can come read, inshallah. I thought it's not fair to put him in the spot. So, Abdullah, he can put this microphone on, inshallah. So, inshallah, with the beginning of Quran recitation, just to remind myself first and foremost that this is the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are hearing, and this carries with it guidance, shifa, nur, many beneficial things, inshallah. So even if you don't understand its words, allow its meanings to come into your heart and to perforate around your body, inshallah. So, Bismillah, Abdullah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر ليلة القدر خير من 1000 شهر تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر.
Really excellent tajweed, mashallah. Allah increase you and bless your father and mother, inshallah, for the hard work they put in, and your teachers as well, of course, inshallah. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Let's just put this second microphone away. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'na wa anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna ilma. قال الله تعالى في كتابه العزيز بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قد أفلح من زكاها وقد خاب من دساها صدق الله العظيم. Inshallah, today we will begin with an insight into the second stage of the course, which is something that is quite unique, because often when we come to Islamic studies or Islamic classes, Islam is often taught as something that is learnt. But Islam has never been knowledge. Of course, there is knowledge within it. It encompasses things you should know. But Islam has always been something that is practiced, something that you become, something that transforms you. And as we've spoken in the past, we are comprised of how many parts, Abdullah?
So, 5 parts.
Yes, very good. And can you name me them?
Your heart,
Very good.
your mind,
Good.
your nafs, your
Very good.
And your tongue. No.
Pretty much. Your body. Okay, mashallah. Excellent. So, Abdullah, mashallah, the star student that he is, he recalled all five, which is the body, the mind, the heart, the nafs, which is your emotional center, and your spirit. Of those, who are you, Saqib?
Spirit.
You are the spirit. You are given faculties in order to traverse this world. 4 faculties: your body, your mind, your heart, which is your moral center. Your mind can't decide what's right and wrong. It can process information, but that information doesn't always tell you what's right or wrong. And we can see that with what's going wrong in the world. And then you've got your nafs, which is the emotional center. And each of these plays a key part in you going through the world. Without one of these, you would struggle to go through. But what happens is, like with anything, the nafs, the person and their body and who they are begins to become accustomed to things that it shouldn't do and things that it should do. And our purpose is simply to realign what each of these faculties do in order to bring it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we often talk about, and many of you would have heard from us now, the purification of the body. The purification of the body is, and I'll start with this, is in terms of the curriculum, it's the most important part. In fact, it's the thing that's going to come up in the exam. What's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to ask you? He's going to ask you about how you spoke, what you looked at, what you sought with your hand, your rizq. But it's important to understand that I wanted to set this picture before we go into the second stage. Now, the second stage is going to be the purification of the mind. And this is something many people, especially in our society, is kind of it's very topical now. Mental health, being aware of your thoughts, how to kind of cure things like depression. But it's important to understand the context of today's talk is purely to give you a snippet, a glimpse of what's to come. Because these things very much come in a sequence. And a lot of the time, people spend a long time thinking and never doing. For most of our life, we might be sitting there thinking, mashallah, it's a really good thing, whatever. And then you never actually activate it. So the purpose of today is to give you, and this is one of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. There will be things, in fact, the mention of Jannah and Jahannam is exactly that. It's to tell you what's to come so that to motivate you for what to do ahead of the time. So the purpose of today is to give you an idea of what's to come, but it's not yet something that you start at the first stage. So for those of you who've not started the course or want to start the course, the first thing you begin to start is that which is obligatory for you. And the wisdom behind that is everything in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, do. He doesn't say think and contemplate first. He says no. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Successful are the believers. And then it immediately proceeds to list things you should do. الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ, and so on and so forth. Now this isn't to confuse the prerequisites. The prerequisites are your aqeedah and what you should know from an intellectual perspective. That's a different conversation. What we're talking about today, and what we're going to get a glimpse into, is the understanding of how we can control our thoughts, what goes on in our mind, what goes on in how we can begin to purify those and align them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the first thing to understand is this is a journey of doing, it's not a journey of knowing. So what you start, and what's unique about this Sunday, is you're not just coming here just to learn and mashallah you leave. There should be work that goes on in the 7 days between each session. And if you haven't already, you should really seek a mentor. You sign up, and then you get chased up, or rather you chase up your mentor and make sure that they hold you accountable for what's going on, how you're getting through the purification. And the second thing which is important to remember is that the journey is more important than the destination. So being on that process is success itself. And actually, if you were to die on that way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will write you as if you've accomplished all of it. which is incredibly important to remember, because much of the time when we're doing this is we are going to confront failure a lot. And realizing that is important, because you're going to have to fix things you never may have even realized was a problem to start with. And actually, when you begin that process, the first thing is to realize it's a problem and then begin to weed it out slowly. So, a question for all of you: where do thoughts come from? What are we talking about here? Yes, Rowan. Okay, good. They come in your brain. They are the faculty of your mind. And how is the mind, what are the sources of input into that mind?
Environment,
Okay, what do you mean by that?
what you're exposed to, things that you take in through your eyes, through your ears,
Okay,
things that you get exposed. Yeah.
so if we can generically kind of categorize that as just your general interactions with people and so on. Okay, good. Where else?
Knowledge.
Okay, so knowledge, your thought doesn't necessarily come from knowledge. You kind of study and receive knowledge, so to speak. But the thoughts that you're having in a day-to-day basis, whatever it may be, what are the sources of those thoughts? If we can bucket them together. So if you can, there's more chairs at the back, inshallah. If you kind of grab one, inshallah, we can sit in. So broadly speaking, there's many ways or many sources that input and affect the way our brains were thinking. But we can broadly categorize the human faculty, the things that we're in kind of interfacing with, and there are others. But there is the nafs, which is your emotions, your heart, which is your moral center, and then there's, I've mentioned this here as a category, but there's other people, but I'm going to mention specifically shaitan. Oftentimes, many people will place a great emphasis on the last one. Okay, so like shaitan, and I hear waswasa, and I hear these other things. But in terms of thought processes and what goes on in the mind is thinking in a day over 1 million different thoughts. And most of those thoughts are actually subconscious. So a large part of what you need to do when you come to purifying yourself is actually dealing with much of the subconscious behavior. And we've spoken about that previously. But the thing I want to address is the first one, which is the nafs, which is your emotional center. Much of what you're thinking, much of what you kind of have in mind, you are driven primarily by your emotions. I had someone message me and he's like, subhanAllah, he doesn't feel like praying. He just feels like he's just doing the motions. How would you classify that in terms of righteousness? For most people, that person feels like he's an unreligious person because he's doing an action, he doesn't feel much in the mood, he feels a bit down and so on. But the Prophet ﷺ, look at how he classified it. The Sahaba came to him once and they said, sometimes we get thoughts that come to us and we're so disgusted by those thoughts, so repulsed by them. And if we were to utter them, we'd worry what everyone would look at us saying. It's like it's this horrible thought. And the Prophet ﷺ responded and he said, this is the essence of faith. This is the essence of faith. Why? Because shaitan, as a creation, he's there to do what? He's there to? Misguide. If somebody's in the club and drinking alcohol and womanizing, he's not going to bother going there because that person is already doing the things he's doing. He doesn't need to instill more. Who's he going to go to? The Highlands Mosque, as Brother Bexod said, right? He's going to go to a place where there's treasure, where there's work to do. So the thoughts that you're receiving, these are just thoughts that are signaling that there's treasure inside. And Shaitan is coming to try and pervert the course of justice. The emotions is like the inner child. It's the thing that becomes obsessive, wanting and wanting and wanting behavior. And it can affect the way that your thoughts are directed, the way that your thoughts are steered. And the guidance on this generally is thoughts will always come and go. And satanic power as he mentions in the Quran, shaitan has a limit of what he can do. All he can do is he can call you to do something, and then the question is whether you accept it or not. So he will tell you something, he'll show you it, and then you can decide, do you have it or not? Now, what's the analogy of this? I'll come back to these in a second. It's like your phone. How many of you, if you look at your spam, how many of you even look at your spam inbox? Or when you get an email and the I got a call the other day, and I got a text message, and the text message said, I've changed my number, Dad. And it's a very strange text, but I couldn't tell if it was my dad, if it wasn't my dad, I'm not sure. So I replied, okay, sure, should I delete the other one? They said, yes. I said, fine. And they said, oh, by the way, I can't log in anymore because I've changed my number. Can you send me £600 or whatever, right? So and I said, subhanAllah. But those sorts of messages, they're annoying, they're irritating, but what you do and what you've learned to do with spam is you just compartmentalize it. You can't sit there coming to who runs the internet, I don't know, Google or wherever it may be, Sarkam can answer us a bit better, and go, look, can you stop sending me spam, please? It's not fair, it's not fair. Is the spam you? No. Is it in your inbox? Yes, but it's just irrelevant, just ignore it. All that shaitan can do is, imagine you have this projector, he's just projecting an image for you, and you can look at it and entertain it, or you can just let it pass. And this is what often happens with thoughts. And what the Prophet ﷺ mentioned is that it's not, the thoughts that you have, they're not examinable. Because it's not actually, there's many different things coming in. The only thing that become examinable is the Prophet ﷺ said that a person, their nation, the Muslim Ummah, have been forgiven on anything they think about, so long as they don't act upon it, or so long as they don't speak about it. So as these thoughts are coming, and as they're passing in, as they pass out, what you begin to learn, and what the course does, and this is why I mentioned the course is very much something you practice. Because what happens is, with your mentor, you'll work on whatever specific issues they are, but they begin to start saying, okay, there's two essential things to do. If I tell you all to not think of a pink elephant, immediately, whether you wanted to or not, the first thing that comes to mind is a pink elephant. So oftentimes what you do is, the first thing is you start steering thoughts in a different direction. So start thinking of something else that's halal. Think something else that's positive, to allow you to just ignore the other thoughts that are coming in. Where thoughts become toxic is when you dwell on them and you allow them to settle into the heart. And that's when you begin to really hold on to the thought and begin to continue to practice it. And it settles into the heart, it becomes a characteristic. So let's say an example, somebody is sitting and thinking, and they get a negative thought about a brother. And your first reaction is like, where did that come from? That's not a very nice thing to think about. Then know that's not from you. You can just let that pass and just steer that thought with something positive instead. If something becomes habitual, that you're regularly thinking about it and it settles into the heart, that's when it requires more intimate detoxing. But the Prophet ﷺ in another hadith mentioned, Allah has forgiven the ummah for mistakes or forgetfulness or what they're coerced to do. And really understanding where this is all placed within the paradigm becomes really important, to actually beginning to understand what the purification of the mind looks like. So what I'm doing is I'm really setting context first. I haven't really gone into the process yet, but I'm trying to set the scene. And the scene is as follows. What you think about is not in the exam. If you go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment, He's not going to say, you thought about this, this and this. So many people concern themselves heavily with their thoughts, even though it's not actually part of the exam. That's number one. Number two is the methodology with which we're going to begin to speak about. There is a process with which those thoughts can be controlled. But what you have to realize is, the closer you come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it's natural for thoughts to come to mind that you become repulsed by. That's not a sign that you are an unrighteous person. The righteousness is determined by the way you act and the way you speak. It's not controlled by your mind. And that becomes a really important paradigm to set ahead of kind of going into the details of this. So what is on the exam? What's in the exam is the state of your heart. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. On the day that no money or children will help you except the one who comes to Allah with a sound heart. And the entry roads into the heart are the 7 faculties of the body. Your body, your eyes, your ears, your hands, your feet, your stomach, your private parts. Everything else is itself not in the exam. The other part of the exam is the heart itself, the state of the heart itself. And this is where you begin to purify things like arrogance, pride, jealousy, these sorts of things as well. So I'm going to go through this quite quickly. And the reason I'm going to go through this quite quickly is because of exactly what I've just said. It's not in the exam per se. But really, the idea of this is to give you an insight, because I know a lot of people tend to ask me about this. They'll say, how do I stop these thoughts? How do I purify my mind? How do I overthink things? But understanding the general process of this is useful. But what happens is this is very much a doing course. So when you get to the stage, it's something you will work with your mentor and they will work on the specific things that you have. Because everybody's different. Everyone has different elements to them. But the idea is, when you get negative thoughts and so on, thoughts can become like dark clouds. And what happens is with sin and disobedience, as you act on those thoughts, it begins to cloud your judgment, it begins to cloud the guidance that you have. And this darkness is opposed to like the prophetic mindset. So you begin to think ill of people, you begin focusing on sins and things that you wish to do. Whereas the other side is the positive whispers and positive thinking and reflecting that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would like you to practice on. So the one in a heedless state, their mind becomes very clouded with darkness and evil thoughts. And this obscures their ability to kind of focus on wishing to do good, because their thoughts are constantly telling them to, or inspiring them to do sinful thoughts and to do sinful things, and they're actually acting upon them. That's why it's always important to start purifying the action first in order to before beginning to actually account for the thoughts that are going in. What happens is, through a process of resistance and repetition, you get given certain practices to start doing, certain things to start focusing on instead, certain ideas and minds and so on, and we'll go through those shortly, which begin to remove the cloud of negative thoughts. The mind is such a thing that you focus on one thing at a time. So when you start giving positive things to focus on, it starts repelling and pushing away the other things that you would otherwise think about. And what eventually happens is this becomes like a protective layer around the mind, so that you're protecting it from these other thoughts that could come in, because you're preoccupying it with positive ways in which you should think about. Now, I'm not going to go through these in detail, but these are like the 10 levels in which your mind can be engaged. And what this is really wonderful in is it gives you an insight into what those who are really close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what goes on in their mind. Have you ever sat and thought, I wonder what he's thinking about, what's going on, right? But what's wonderful about this is it's at every level you kind of see it's a very profound realization. So the first level is actually beginning to refrain. Remember, we always clean before we fill. You don't get a cup and it's already got dirt in it and then you just pour more water in it. You always want to clean it first. Even if there's a little drop, you want to clean it. So the first focus is it beginning to intentionally realize and about the thoughts, the evil thoughts that are going through your mind, and beginning to twist and turn those off. And there's a process with which this is done. Then begins the positive aspects. The first of which is the point which we always mention repeatedly in our seminars, which is to begin to remember the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Can anyone remind me what are the 3 keys of presence for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The three things to remember Allah.
He sees you, he is with you, he sees you, he hears you.
Excellent. Is to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with you, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can hear you, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can see you. The second stage is that in every act of worship you start doing, to bring those thoughts into mind, so that they're present in those acts of worship. So it starts with things like salah, reading Quran, and so on. And what gradually happens with the mind is that presence begins to increase as the times in which that begins to come shorter and shorter. Now it's a very profound thing, and actually the starter activity, which I'll mention at the end, really begins to inculcate just having the presence of Allah in your mind. But as a beginner activity, in your salah, in every motion of your prayer, at least having a moment's realization that you're standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what does that mean? It means you realize He's with you. Now imagine if I was alone in a room and I had my laptop in front of me and my father was standing next to me. I would be very conscious about what I'm typing, what I'm doing. Or when you're at work and your boss is looking over you. Very conscious of every line of code you type, every line of accounting or whatever it is you do. Imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with you. Now people tend to think of this in a very negative way. But actually it's a very positive thing. Imagine if any moment you can just turn to your manager and say, oh, by the way, can you just help me with this? Oh, by the way, can you just help me with this? The manager is limited in time, limited in ability. Imagine asking Allah. In any moment, you just say, oh Allah, by the way, this bit's quite hard. Can you just help me? And bringing to mind that He's with you. He's not in the Kaaba, He's not in the masjid, He's not on the prayer mat. He's here right next to you. That Allah can see you. He's seeing what you're seeing. And He's seeing further than what you're seeing. He knows everything about it. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can hear you without you needing to say anything on your tongue. He already knows what's in your heart. He knows what's in your mind. He knows what's in the future. So the second stage begins to bring this into the acts of worship. And what happens is this begins to increase with actual actions and thoughts. So we begin to, in the fourth stage, bring in prophetic supplications, prophetic prayers. Beginning to start thinking, what would the Prophet ﷺ do in this situation? Why? Why do we bring the Prophet ﷺ in? Who can help me? Ahmed.
The last example.
So very good. That's why I picked you. Very good example, mashallah. So the Prophet ﷺ is the perfect example of what we should be. So if you just think, what would the Prophet ﷺ do in this situation, you begin to understand what you should be doing in this situation. So preoccupying your mind with how would the Prophet ﷺ be thinking? How would he respond to this situation? How would he write to a person in this situation, and so on and so forth. So the supplications the Prophet says, many of you would have memorized some of them, right? For this week, just take a moment to understand, just to read the translation of them and think about the mindset of the Prophet as he says them before the act. So when he says, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-khubthi wal-khaba'ith, what's that dua for? Before you go to the bathroom. What's the mindset that underlines that sentence? Why is he seeking refuge from filth and from evil devils and shayateen? What's the purpose of that? Because he's very conscious he's going into a place that is dirty, a place where there's devoid of angels, and he's seeking the protection of Allah, who is with him everywhere in that moment. So these levels advance, and what happens is you begin to, in every moment, begin to think about and learn the biography of the Prophet ﷺ and bring the biography of the Prophet ﷺ into every action that you're doing, every act that you're doing, every stage that you're doing. Until the final stage, you no longer have moments where you're not conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're always consistently thinking, what would Allah wish me to do? How would He wish me to practice? Now, the way this is done is the same way as the body sheets. You get assigned a sheet, you get assigned a mentor, well, the mentor is always the same. And you will work through it with a tick or a cross. And it's about doing 30 days consistently with the majority of that action practiced. And what it does is you realize very quickly, oh my God, I hardly ever think about Allah, to moving to a point when it increases. And that process is a gradual one. Some people take to it very naturally, other people struggle, but it's a process that everybody is capable of doing. And over 30 days, that begins to become a habit if done every day, so that it just becomes second nature. So the sheets aren't round, but this one's round to fit in the slide. But you'll kind of tick it as you're going through, and you'll make sure, this is the painful bit, it's 30 days consistently. And the reason it's consistent is because in failure there is a greater lesson than success. So with my students, when I teach them GCSE maths or something, we always tell them the best thing that can happen ahead of your exams is to get a wrong answer. Because then you know exactly where the problem is. If you take a mock exam and you get 100%, you're going to go into that exam thinking you know everything. And then something comes up you don't know, oh my God. But if you get a mistake, you know exactly where to address. You know, okay, that's the issue. And that's the purpose of this course. We're working through systematically who you are to fix these. Now, what do I want you to take away from this? Because all of this I said is very theoretical, but this is the starter activity. So whoever wants to start the course, this is the first thing you do. And everybody who's started, they've started on this, which is you set an alarm on your phone. Every hour, it will chime, and you bring to mind the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember when I said that captures, these three starter activities captures everything on the course? This is what it's introducing you to. Everybody I've spoken to who's introduced this to their lives speaks of how profound an impact it has on their life. Because you are actively bringing to mind Allah, and sometimes you'll catch yourself in the middle of doing something bad, your phone rings, and you're like, oh my God, okay, I have to remember Allah, this is awkward, right? And then you stop. And it increases that presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Marwan, mashallah, in his khutbah talked about some of the specific attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala you can bring to mind. Which characteristic you can reflect in that moment. And the other aspect we talk about is the long periods of thoughtful silence. People just think of the word silence, they forget the word thoughtful. Because when you're talking, you're not talking to Allah. You're usually engaging with creation. So the three starter activities, which is, I put them in a different order. The first one is actually this, because you begin to inculcate a relationship with Allah. So when you're just with people, be conscious of what you're saying. And the last one is, whenever you do speak, make sure it's something good. Make sure you leave them in a better state. Because these three actions can summarize everything that it means to come to close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is a very brief introduction of the process of purifying the mind. But inshallah, I'll take one or two questions inshallah before we go into the dhikr if there are any. Is there any questions at all? Is that comprehensive? Inshallah. Okay, no problem. So what's wonderful about this, and like I said, the beauty of this begins to actually manifest when it begins to be traversed. And I've spoken to many people who are, I'll come to you in a second. I've spoken to many people who've started, and the first thing they begin to notice is suddenly a rush of all their weaker aspects of who they are. And actually those begin to flood in, and then you begin to work on those slowly, inshallah. Yes, second.
So, a bit late with the question, just thinking about it. So, touching on what you mentioned, and been thinking about this since Marwan's khutbah as well, in terms of being able to bring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala into every situation. Like, some situations it's very easy. You need help with something, or you're doing something that's related to your ibadah or a challenge in your life or whatever, and you can find relevant ways to do that. But then there's other maybe more routine, more worldly things perhaps, where it's not immediately obvious.
Give me an example.
let's say I'm building a PC and I'm deliberating over which parts to put inside this PC, and it's like thinking through the technicalities of this versus that, and just something, worldly, technical, for example. Like in those moments, it almost feels like I'm detracting away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm focusing on this worldly thing as opposed to.
So the essence of what we're trying to achieve here is not to necessarily see us asking Allah in the way that we've traditionally done. Oh Allah, help me with this, help me with this. Our job is to reflect what Allah does. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator. He creates things. He's the mubdi', he's the innovator. He makes things that, oh my God, that's incredible. Look at the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in our role as human beings, we are reflecting those attributes. So in your building of a computer, you are not doing anything except creating, right? You're building it, you're thinking. So in that moment, you think, I am reflecting what Allah has put me here to do, which is to create and to build and to manifest. Let's give another example. You're with your children, you're playing. How are you going to bring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to mind? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He asks us to connect the rahim. He says the rahim is from the word rahmah. And whoever cuts it is like he's cut Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And actually connecting with Allah, that you are connecting people through Allah and to Allah. So it's more about, I'll give you an easy, the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like the ideal, the gold standard. But I'll give you an easy way for everyone to be able to understand this. What would you think of Allah as a kind of, in terms of his characteristics and his traits? And connect to what you would understand that to be. The names are a reflection of who He is. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to build a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through His characteristics, through His traits, through His attributes. So in whatever you're doing, you're trying to think how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala manifests this particular thing in whatever it is I'm doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it comes easier with practice, but in almost every situation there is a way in which this can be kind of understood or broken down, inshallah.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Yeah.
Or,
What do you think about that?
I don't know whether he meant, I'm sorry, that within that concept of remembering Allah, and you're doing a work that is a bit tasking, possibly a bit stressful, and those thoughts are coming, will you use that same mindset of remembering Allah as well as asking Allah to guide you at the same time? I don't know whether.
so are you talking about it specifically from a thought level?
Yes.
So I'm not sure if that was your question. Apologies, but I think generally the idea of this in a very simple way. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we can't analogize Him because obviously I'm giving an analogy to make it easier to understand. But if Muhammad Amin is looking at me right now, so if I imagine he's just looking at me constantly, the interaction is going to be very much, okay, not just he's watching me, I need to be wary, but it's also, oh Muhammad, by the way, can you help me with this please? Oh, can you come? And this is a Lord that is far more merciful, far more knowing than every intimate aspect of you. So the idea of what you're inculcating is a deference of thoughts and ideas that you know that there's a creator with you at any moment that can help you with any given thing that you're doing. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever He loves seeing you doing, right? He's and so on and so forth. Does that answer things? Inshallah. We can, inshallah, for those of you, before I forget, so there is a course next week on the 25th on breaking addictions, breaking bad habits. So Sister Abida, who comes here, is actually one of the speakers, along with Dr. Nasir and Imran. It would touch on a more focused manner, specifically on the issue of addictions. On the issue of addictions, things like pornography, things like drugs, alcohol. Nowadays, TikTok. 119 million Americans are now having withdrawal symptoms, right? But the idea of just YouTube and these are all addictive behaviors. And the question is, how can you break free of these? And I've met people who think they can never break free. We probably all have at some point. But there is a prophetic methodology to it. We're lucky because it's happening in Birmingham, in the Amana Mosque. So I would strongly recommend registering for it, inshallah. Oh yes, so there's the Sisters Talk, which is also on the Saturday. mashallah, they do a lot of activities and some of these overlap. So there is the Sisters Al-Kahf talk as well, which is next Saturday. And I think there's this addiction talk as well, which I'll bring. I think for those of you who are not on the group, I'll bring the poster up for you all to have a look at, inshallah. And we'll quickly wrap up. So it's in the Mu'adh Center on the 25th of January. So this is the poster. I can send it for anyone who's not been, but I would strongly recommend going to this, if not for yourself, but to help with your children or to help with your friends, because it's a very common and widespread issue these days. And then, what time is it? It's an all-day thing. I think the time's written here. 10 a.m. till 4 p.m. on the Saturday, inshallah. And then the other, for those of you who maybe want a different tone to their Saturday afternoon, there is another one which is for sisters only, going through the Tafsir of Surah Al-Kahf, which is also in Birmingham, mashallah. That's a good point. It's in the same place. So you can go there and decide which one you want to go to, inshallah. So I didn't even know that. Alhamdulillah. Okay. So inshallah, for those who've not been with us before, the second part of this is really to enjoy and to bask in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Something the Prophet in over 25 hadith emphasized the importance of remembering Allah collectively in a group, inshallah. Because of time, I won't go into the hadith today, but I want you to bring to mind what I mentioned today. So really bring to mind that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with you, that He can hear you and that He can see you. And imagine that you are about to converse in a relationship with Him and to converse in a conversation with Him, inshallah, through the dhikr. For the men, please recite loudly. We're going to move to a stage when we no longer have to hear this sound.
Power on. Connected.
So that we can just do it together, inshallah. And for the sisters, you can participate silently, inshallah. So we'll begin. I'll just give you all a moment just to close your eyes and imagine the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala high in the sky and that His nur is descending down into you, inshallah. If you can recite after me, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
أستغفر الله.
أستغفر الله.
أستغفر الله.
أستغفر الله.
أستغفر الله.
أستغفر الله.
اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد.
اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد
وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد.
اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد
وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد.
اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد
وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله.
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 مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا. مولاي صل وسلم دائما وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا محمد 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 سيد الكونين والثقلين والفريقين من عرب ومن عجم محمد 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 سيد الكونين والثقلين والفريقين من عرب ومن عجم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا هو الحبيب الذي ترجى شفاعته لكل هول من الأهوال مقتحم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا فاعلم أنه لا إله إلا الله 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 لا مقصود إلا الله لا مقصود إلا الله لا مقصود إلا الله لا مقصود إلا الله إلا الله إلا الله إلا الله إلا حفيظ ناصر الله لا إله إلا الله حفيظ ناصر الله لا إله إلا الله لا مسجود إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا مسجود إلا الله لا إله إلا الله إلا الله إلا الله إلا أنت المولى أنت الحق ليس المولى إلا هو أنت المولى أنت الحق ليس المولى إلا هو حسبي ربي جل الله ما في قلبي غير الله حسبي ربي جل الله ما في قلبي غير الله حسبي ربي جل الله ما في قلبي غير الله نور محمد صلى الله لا إله إلا الله نور محمد صلى الله لا إله إلا الله
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. Oh Allah, we ask you to accept this gathering. Oh Allah, we ask you to purify our bodies, our minds, our hearts, and our nafs. Oh Allah, we ask you to make us one of your friends, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Oh Allah, I ask you to allow us to gather in a gathering like this in Jannah, as you've gathered us in a gathering here in Jannah, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Oh Allah, we ask you to accept our prayers, our du'as, make us people who worship you for you and not for anything other than you, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. For those new, I am available after, inshallah. If you want to learn more about what the course is, how to sign up, I will be here after Salah and we can run through that. We will be praying Isha Salah downstairs at 8 o'clock. Otherwise, inshallah, we'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Maybe.